Hola, Profi Isabel aquí otra vez. Hoy vamos a discutir sobre los errores or mistakes in language learning. There are a few important ideas to keep in mind when making mistakes as you try to learn a new language.
Funny language stories. I've made many mistakes as I've learned Spanish, and I continue to make mistakes, but probably one of the first and most memorable ones is when I was a senior in high school. I went to Cancun, Mexico with some friends for spring break, and I was so excited. I was going to use all of my Spanish I'd been learning for 4 years. One of the first places we went was McDonald's, of course, and I ordered all in Spanish. I was all excited. I gave the lady the money, and she said to me, "Para aquí o para llevar?" And I'm thinking, "Para aquí for here," or "para llevar," which should be to go, but llevar means to wear. So I'm thinking, for here or to wear? And that didn't make sense. So I said, "Para ir," which in my mind is to go, for to go. And she just looks at me, "Para ir?" And she hands me my food and says, "Para llevar."
Making mistakes when using a new language is normal, and even small children learning their first language make mistakes. Haven't you ever heard a small child say that they goed to the store?
So my interesting story is that one summer when I was living with a family in Campeche, Mexico, I finally got enough confidence to talk to them one evening, and I was telling them about this story about how my mom, who's only 5 feet tall, had fought a black bear. The word for bear in Spanish is oso. So I'm telling them this story, and I'm feeling pretty good because the whole time they're listening and they're looking very interested. And then all of a sudden, toward the end of the story, I wasn't quite sure what had happened because they were starting to look at me like they were confused. And I realized all too late that I had switched the word oso to ojo, which means eye. So when you're telling stories, beware of the black ojo.
A great number of researchers and educators alike firmly believe that you learn from your mistakes, or at least you become better at self-monitoring. Your internal voice becomes more finely trained and begins to warn you about upcoming mistakes. Your ear becomes more finely tuned so that you hear yourself while you're making the mistake and you begin to self-correct. In other words, you learn by doing.
So I lived in Venezuela for a few years as a missionary, and while I was there I had a companion, and we would go and knock doors and tell people that we had a family message for them. And so one day this one companion was knocking doors with me, and when a lady came to the door, he said, "Tengo un masaje para la familia." And when she heard that, she said, "Oh, that sounds great." And she went back and she got her daughters, and everybody came out, and she's like, "Hey, we're ready for the massage." When he said "tengo un masaje," he meant un mensaje. But she heard, "We have a family massage to offer everybody." And it was really funny. We laughed a lot about it afterwards.
Over and over, research has shown that the most successful language learners share the same characteristics, no matter what language they are learning. One of those characteristics is that these learners are risk takers when it comes to using the new language. In other words, they feel it's more important to try and use the language, even though their expression of that language may not be perfect.
Okay, so I was studying in Mexico, and I was in college, and one of the girls that was with me, she was not a Spanish-speaking student. She was just, getting some credits. And so she would say things, and she'd mess up, fumble on her Spanish, and she would say, "Oh, estoy embarazada. And people would look at her kind of funny, and they would look down, they'd look up at her face, look down again, look up. And then she found out later that embarazada, which she thought meant embarrassed, really meant pregnant. So that's what it was.
Rather than dwelling on your fear of making a mistake, know that mistakes are essential to learning. Be aware that each language is unique and complex, and your knowledge of your native tongue may not help you in the new language. Experimenting with the language and making mistakes are all part of the process.
So once I was living in Mexico, and a group of Americans came to do a mission there at a church in the local city. I was asked to be a translator for them, and so I spent the day just translating different things for people who had things to share with them. So once this gentleman came up and he was going to share, with the congregation, and I asked him, I said, do you need me to translate? And he says, no, I think I've got this. I know enough Spanish that I think I can get through this. So I quietly stepped to the side and let him go ahead and address the congregation. So in his little gringo accent, he said, hola, yo soy Billy, yo soy de Texas y estoy aquí para compartir con ustedes hoy. Pero antes de empezar, yo creo que nosotros debemos orinar. At that point, the crowd kind of gave him this look like they had no idea what was going on. So I quietly leaned over and I said, did you want them to pray with you? And he said, yes, pray. And I said, the verb for to pray is orar, not orinar, which means to urinate. It just wasn't a good deal.
Making mistakes makes good stories.
And last one. 3, 2.
For many years, I lived in Thailand, and one of my favorite things to order when we would go out to eat was the fried pork spare ribs with garlic. Muy ton sa gratiem. And as you know, Thai is a tonal language, which means you could be mispronouncing something by just saying it with the wrong tone, rising tone, falling tone. But I knew I had this right. Muy ton sa gratiem. I had those tones down. Until many years later, my Thai friend told me, you know what you were really ordering at those Thai restaurants? Pig's farts.
1.
So go out and make stories. Entonces, buena suerte y cuenta las historias graciosas.